Story 1 by Reddit user SapphireLion15. I think it's finally time I write this down. It's haunted me for years, but maybe this will help me move on. I don't know if I can ever forgive myself for what happened that night. I was 15. My girlfriend, her brother, my best friend, and I had come up with the brilliant idea to stay out all night on Halloween. We had the perfect plan. My friend, Art, not his real name, and I would tell our parents that we were going to spend the night at Layla's and Will's, not their real names, house. Likewise, Layla would tell her parents that she and Will would be spending the night at my house. I know it was stupid, but we were confident that our plan would work. I wish the plan had failed. That Halloween night, we'd set out, feeling like total rebels. We'd all decided on a group costume, and each of us was dressed up as a DC superhero. Will had dressed as Superman, Art was the Flash, Layla was Supergirl, and I was Batgirl. We were all pumped. We had the whole night to stuff our faces with candy, hang out, and do whatever we wanted to. After we'd trick-or-treated for about 3 hours, I'm not kidding, people started shutting their doors. By 12, there wasn't a single light on or door open. We four were the only people out on the street, and with the exception of a barking dog, there was no noise. Layla and I were bored, and I asked if we should just go home. Will refused. You're at a sleepover at my house, remember? And I'm sleeping at yours. Do you want to be the one to admit to your mum that you lied? Come on, Will, Art spoke up. He'd been eating a lot of candy and had been pretty quiet for the last few minutes, likely battling a massive stomachache. This isn't as fun as you said it'd be. Maybe it'd be better if we just went home and told the truth. They'll be mad, but maybe we can still have an actual sleepover. Will looked at each of us and realized that he was the only one who wanted to stay out. He sighed and looked like he was about to relent. Then he looked behind us, and his face lit up like a jack-o'-lantern. What's that? He said excitedly, already beginning to move towards it. I turned around. Not 20 feet away was a house that I'd never seen before on our street. It looked like a typical townhouse. That's usually what you see in our neighborhood, but it was covered from porch to chimney with Halloween decorations. And not the cheap plastic ones you get at the dollar store, but the quality makes you want to run decorations that give kids nightmares. There were 2 disturbingly lifelike pumpkin-headed scarecrows guarding the front gate, and over 24 skeletons standing in attention in the front yard. Jack-o'-lanterns dotted the porch, each one with a face frozen in agony. A gigantic spider was perched in the show window, looking like it intended to make the shrub it was hovering over its next meal. Bones were scattered across the roof, as if someone had just dropped a handful of them from the sky. And, for the finishing touch, the spotlight hidden among the shrubbery made the entire house glow an eerie purple. Layla and I glanced at each other. How had we not seen this house earlier? Granted, we had been paying close attention to every house we passed, but still, we'd been all over town. We'd have noticed a glowing purple house, right? I turned to ask Art, but he was as entranced as Will. Before I could blink, he was running towards the house too. Once again, I glanced at Layla. She shrugged her shoulders, as if asking what I expected from 2 Halloween-crazed boys. I grabbed her hand, and we ran after them. Up close, the house was even more disturbing. The scarecrows eyed us as we walked through the gate. I tried not to gag as I passed them. Someone had certainly taken liberties to make the yard believable. The things stank like rotting pumpkins. I gripped Layla's hand a little tighter as we passed the skeletons. They must have been from those expensive artisan websites, I thought. They sure didn't look fake. We walked up the porch steps, with Will shaking from excitement. Art's eyes were practically glowing. I remember wondering, half-jokingly, if they were in some kind of a trance. Will rang the doorbell. It was the sound of a church bell, and resonated throughout the house. "Trick or treat," we shouted dutifully, although Layla was practically crushing my hand. I was grateful for it. I needed to know that I wasn't the only one who found all of this unsettling. The door was practically thrown open. A gorgeous woman stood in the doorway. She had long legs, thick copper hair that stopped at her shoulders, black eyeliner, and blood-red lipstick. She was dressed in a ravening witch costume and grinned when she saw the four of us. Well, when she saw the boys. My, I didn't expect to be visited by two handsome heroes tonight. She gave a high-pitched giggle. Her voice reminded me of how ladies in old gangster movies talked. Art smiled and thanked her. Will was just staring at her. I took a step closer to Layla. That's when the lady noticed us. I think she knew immediately that we weren't as captivated as the boys were, not by her house or her beauty. Sure, she was gorgeous, but she was an adult, and I was already with Layla. Her eyes glazed over as she saw us, but her smile didn't waver. I noticed that she was holding a bowl of candy. She slowly extended it to me. Candy, Batgirl. I wrapped both my arms around Layla and took a step backwards from the lady. I could tell she wanted something, and it wasn't anything good. No thanks. We've eaten too much candy already. It wasn't a lie. We'd eaten half of our candy throughout the evening. The woman's smile wavered. She blinked 3 times, as if it was the last thing she'd expected. I noticed something strange about her eyes. They were kind of cloudy. She turned and offered candy to the boys. Will took a handful while Art only took 2. Obviously still suffering from a stomachache. I glanced again at the candy. The pieces weren't in wrappers, and it didn't look like any brand I'd ever seen. It sort of resembled malted milk balls, except bigger and lumpier. When the boys had finished their candy, the woman looked at the 4 of us. You must be parched. Why didn't you come in for some apple cider? She gestured to the front door, which stood gaping open, like a mouth. Layla physically leaned away from the door. She wouldn't go in there for $1,000, let alone a glass of cider. I agreed with her. I forced a smile. No thank you. We turned and started to get down off the porch, when I realized that Layla and I were alone. Will and Art were gone, and so was the woman. My heart rate tripled. They went in the house. My stomach hurt. Should we call the police? What could we say? That a pretty lady with a spooky yard had lured 2 boys into her house with apple cider? Even if that didn't sound crazy, we were 2 teenagers out past midnight on Halloween. Not exactly what the cops would consider trustworthy. Plus, we couldn't prove that she wanted to hurt the boys. Still, we had to make sure they were okay. We started walking around the house. On the left side, there weren't any windows. This made sense though, it being a townhouse and all. The back of the house had a porch, but the windows and doors were all covered. The right side of the house yielded the same results as the left, leaving us only one option, the show window. We maneuvered around the skeletons in the yard and went as close as we dared up to the window. I, being dressed in black and thus harder to see, decided to look in the window while Layla, dressed in bright red and blue, made sure the lady didn't come out of the house. Before peering in, I took an uneasy glance at the giant spider. Against my better judgment, I touched it. Solid plastic. I sighed and told myself not to be so jumpy. I peered through the window. I was staring at a lit fireplace. It seemed to be the only source of light in the room. It was pretty dim in there. Still, I could make out 2 enormous armchairs on either side of the fireplace. I could make out Art's bright red Flash costume and could see the blue from Will's costume. They were both slumped in the chairs as if asleep. There was a coffee table between the chairs, holding 2 half-empty glasses of what could only be apple cider. In the center of the room stood the lady. She was standing up as straight as a rod, her arms lifeless at her sides. Then, with no warning, her right arm shot straight up. She held it there for a second, then let it fall. A second later, she did it again, with the other arm. Then, I swear, she started growling. As if this was a signal, Will and Art got up. I could tell that their eyes were closed, but they came right over to her. She put her left index finger on Art's forehead and her right index finger on Will's forehead, and she began to chant. Venenum, senidum, age pure, langurum, sanidus, natio, quomodo, lantium, lacui, ut alligent. All three of them suddenly began to convulse. Aunt went down, followed by Will. They both started to kick wildly. Then their kicks became weaker, as if they were losing energy. Then they stopped. I must have made a noise. Layla told me later that tears were streaming down my face. I must have sobbed without knowing it, because the lady turned around. Her eyes were completely blue with no pupils to be seen. Her mouth was hanging open, with saliva the colour of her eyes dripping from her lips. And her face was starting to melt. I screamed. Layla screamed. I shoved myself away from the window and landed flat on my back. The wind was knocked out of me, but I was too scared to care. Layla yanked me to my feet, and we just started running. We charged through the skeletons, which I now thoroughly believed were real. As we charged through the gate, I knocked over one of the scarecrows. Its head smashed to bits on the ground, revealing a human skull underneath. We ran, not knowing where we were going and not caring. We finally ended up in front of my house, and we both collapsed into each other's arms, sobbing. I told my mum everything. At first she thought I was making up a story to get out of lying to her, but one look at our faces and she knew we were serious. She called the cops immediately. When they investigated the strange house, they made a shocking discovery. It belonged to a Mrs. Smith, not her real name, who was a woman in her 20s and fit our descriptions, but she'd been on vacation in Alabama with her mother for the last 2 days. They never found their bodies. Art and Will remain missing to this day. The police don't believe our account of some life-sucking witch. They believe that a child predator drugged them and ran off with them. I don't think Layla and I ever really got over it. We broke up in our 12th grade when she and her family moved away for a fresh start. A few months later, I moved too. We text now and then, but we aren't as close as we used to be. Still, I'm glad I saved her number all these years, because tonight I saw something that brought back that traumatic Halloween. A townhouse, bathed in purple light, with skeletons set up in the front yard. 2 of them guard the gate. One is dressed in a Superman costume. The other is dressed as the Flash. Story 2 by Reddit user Dark of Night. My name is James Strickland. Since the pandemic started, I had been working from home, but I'm not allowed to anymore. I lived on the top floor of an old tower block in London. I'm high risk with diabetes and asthma. I worked as a customer service advisor for an insurance company. My job sucked. It's mind-numbing work and I hated it, but working from home was okay. I lived alone. The good thing about working from home is that you get to sit around in your underwear and play video games while you're working, and it beats travelling into the office and putting up with the constant noise and some of my more irritating colleagues. But now, I'm locked up. I'm writing this from a stolen phone and I don't know if I'll have enough time to finish. My usual workday went a bit like this. I'd get up and grab something to eat and some coffee, power up my laptop for work and my desktop for gaming. I'd log in and start taking calls. I talk to about 50 or so people a day about their shitty insurance claims while playing video games at the same time. Every call is recorded and comes through a secure server that I log into. I'd get an hour for lunch, grab something to eat, and then work again until I finish. Rinse and repeat. Last Monday I got this call through that I'd taken, and it was a prank. Some weird noises and deep heavy breathing. Kept saying my name over and over again until they were screaming it. Gave the usual 3 warnings and then ended the call. The rest of my shift was uneventful, and I logged off at 5 p.m. when I finished. I went to bed around 11 p.m. and fell asleep quickly. Lockdown makes me feel tired all the time. At midnight, my work phone starts to ring, which was weird because it's not a public number. I was logged out of the system, and lines close at 8 p.m. Nearly gave me a damn heart attack. The ringing stopped before I could get to it. It happened again just after 2 and 3 a.m. I unplugged it after that. The next morning, I'd reported the calls in the middle of the night to my manager, and he said it was probably a technical issue, but he'd get our technical support team to look into it and get back to me. My shift was going on as normal until I got this call from an old woman around 11 a.m. "Why didn't you answer your phone, James?" "I think it's just another pissed-off customer. Hold queues have been extreme since the pandemic." I replied with the usual apology about the phone lines being busy. The voice on the other side of the phone just let out this maniacal cackle and said, "No, James, I called you last night a few times, and you didn't answer." I apologized again, getting a bit freaked out, but just thinking it's a weird coincidence and they meant they were calling the company but couldn't get through. Then she said something that chilled my blood. She used my full name. We don't give our full names. "I'll call again tonight. You better answer me, or you'll regret it." Then, she was gone. I was freaked out a lot, but didn't have time to think about it too long. My next caller was already on the line complaining about hold times and a claim for his sick cat. My work phone went again tonight about midnight. I was still up playing video games this time, and grabbed it immediately, my heart in my throat. "Thanks for calling. You're speaking to James, but our offices are closed until 9 a.m. tomorrow. Please call us back then." "James Strickland?" An old man's voice. I nearly fell out of my chair. My heart was racing. "I need you to tell me something." "Who is this?" "This isn't funny," I shouted. The old man let out this gurgling, choking kind of sound, and then said, "Don't fall asleep. If you fall asleep, you won't wake up. I'm trying to protect you from her, but she's getting stronger." He then launched into a vicious coughing fit. Fat chance of me sleeping after this now, anyway. I was terrified. Who the hell is this? Who is she? What the f*** is going on? I felt an irrational stab of panic for having used the F word over my work phone, but dismissed this. "If your phone goes again tonight, don't answer it." The line went dead. I didn't sleep that night. My phone rang 3 more times, but I didn't answer it. My mind was whirling. I called my manager at 9 a.m. the next day to report what had happened. "Weird, mate. Look, this lockdown is hard on all of us. Take a few days off," he chided. I was pissed off with his dismissive tone. "No, I need you to pull the recordings and see who's making these calls. Can we block the number?" He sighed, sounding irritated. "I'll see what I can do, mate. I better go. I've got a Zoom meeting. Take care. I'll catch up with you in a few days." I knew he wasn't going to do anything. My manager is super unreliable. My doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, and I stayed away from people now. I'm terrified of getting coronavirus, but I went to check anyway. As I approached my door, I could hear this awful cackling and scratching at it. I was terrified. There was no way I was going to open the door. I quietly put the chain on and looked through the peephole. It was pitch black. Then, an eye appeared, staring right back at me. A horrible bloodshot eye. The cackling escalated into a horrendous shriek. An ungodly banging started on my door, so hard that it cracked right down the middle. I ran back into my bedroom and grabbed my mobile phone to call the police. But it was dead. No charge at all. This was weird, as it was on charge all night. I tried to plug the charger in, and nothing happened. I grabbed my work phone to call the police on, but there was just the same awful shrieking cackle down the phone. I tried to hang up again and again, but just the same horrendous laugh from the handset. I ran to my kitchen and grabbed a knife and ran back to my front door. I screamed at it to go away. The banging just got louder and a chunk of the top of the door had broken away. "I'm going to make you sick, James. I'm going to make you sick and you'll die." It was laughing maniacally. I could see matted, long, dirty grey hair partially obscuring a horrendous, filthy face covered in open sores which were weeping pus and viscera. Wild, cataract-ridden eyes staring back at me, madness and malice gleaming in them like a malignant cancer. I was screaming as I removed the chain and ripped my front door open, knife raised above my head ready to strike. I plunged the knife into the handle, stabbing again and again, even after that awful screaming cackling stopped. I was covered in blood, but at least the crone thing was dead. It wasn't human. This thing was the personification of disease. Scaly, knobbled tentacles protruded from small openings all over its body. Weeping sores winked at me, pus and viscera pooling around it onto the floor. I couldn't look anymore, and vomited all over it. I ran back into my apartment to call the police again and grab my office phone. It was still shrieking and cackling at me. The crone was on my laptop screen, my PC monitor, and on my TV, reaching out towards me with those hateful tentacles. I grabbed my chair and smashed my laptop, TV, monitor, and phone. But the tentacles had detached and were snaking up the chair. I threw the chair out of my bedroom window, where it would shatter 13 floors below. My phone, still cackling, went with it, along with my laptop, monitor, and television. I was swearing, covered in blood, and the wind coming in through my broken window was startlingly refreshing. I think I must have passed out then. When I woke up, I was in a police station. I told them what happened, and shortly after, I was transferred to a psychiatric ward. They are trying to tell me that I stabbed the postman to death, and there were no calls. I know that's a lie. Sometimes, I can still hear the cackling. And even worse, I think she's made me sick. Everything tastes funny, and I've started to cough, and my temperature is high. Story 3 by Reddit user Skylar Palooza. It was a Tuesday. I'm only mentioning this because no one ever thinks of anything of consequence happening on a Tuesday. Tuesdays are perfectly normal days, filled with tired business people on tubes and trains and buses, fueled by various hot beverages. Or at least, that was my Tuesday. That was my specific Tuesday. It was about 7 a.m. I was heading to the hospital on the Bakerloo line, changing at Baker Street, when I saw it. I've been doing this journey for months now, doing this change hundreds of times already, and I'd never seen the gate before. Maybe I was never paying that much attention, but it was a big gate, floor to ceiling, pumping out little puffs of dust as the tube whittled out, and I wasn't really paying attention that day either. But either way, I saw it that day. I was the last on the platform, having just gotten off the tube, and was meandering my way to the other platform. I have a dodgy knee, so I was walking considerably slower than the other commuters, who power walked everywhere, and was alone on the platform when I glanced to my left and saw the gate. It was one of those huge underground gates that led into various other tunnels, black with soot and filled with wires and machinery, and a distinct lack of lighting, At first, I thought it was very cool. Creepy and dirty, but cool in that steampunk horror kind of way. There were 2 tunnels, one heading straight from the gate and another heading left. Further down the left tunnel, there must have been some kind of dim light, as it threw the faintest shadows into the junction I could see, but it was still rather dark. I was looking deeply into it as I slowly walked past, even slower now to have a proper look. And then, I saw it. At first I thought it was just a worker. You see them slipping in and out of closed doors across tube stations, rattling keys and torches as they go. But as I blinked, I realized it was no worker. So, I stopped. Honestly, at that point it was still mainly curiosity that had stopped me, but the longer I looked, the quicker it turned into concern. It was so far back in the furthest tunnel it was hard to properly see anything in the darkness. But I knew it was pale because the whiteness of its skin shone oddly, even in the darkness. It was easily 7 feet tall, head bent slightly just to fit in the tunnel. I could also see that it didn't look like it was wearing any clothes, as the white reflection of its skin stood in a tall, thin column from floor to ceiling. I don't think any clothes would fit it anyway. It had long, skinny legs, no thicker than my own skinny arms. Long, bony, limp hands hung by his sides with what looked like clawing fingernails, and I looked up to see if it had a face. It didn't, or if it did, its head was so encased in darkness that even its pale skin couldn't shine through. All I could see were 2 large glowing yellow eyes that stood out like streetlights. An announcement played in the background, but it was just a rumbling to my ears. I couldn't even tell if it was the male or female recording. It didn't sound far away or anything, it was just noise. I could see nor hear anything except this thing in front of me. My periphery was suddenly non-existent, and my hearing concentrated on the somewhat laboured breathing of the thing in front of me. Uneven, like it only remembered to breathe every minute or so. Sometimes deeply, sometimes a quick intake. My heart was pounding and my skin was cold despite the muggy air of the tube and my wool coat. My blood pounded like ice through my veins and my knees were shaking, every physical response to fear present. And yet, I wasn't exactly afraid. Not consciously, anyway. I still wasn't properly afraid even when it slowly, so slowly I didn't even notice at first, raised its hand, palm up, to me. Offering. What it was offering I didn't know, but yellow eyes bore into me as its long bony fingers stretched out to me. It wasn't anywhere near close enough to touch, but still it held its hand out to me, and I could imagine how those skinny fingers would feel like, rubbery and almost fake, beneath my hand. I raised my foot slightly, and I honestly wasn't sure if it was to run or step closer. My own thoughts were buried deep beneath the sight and sound of whatever creature stood before me. I wasn't afraid until it whispered. It was at least 9 or 10 feet away from me, but I felt its whisper right in my ear as if it were behind me. It was deep, a growling grumble in my ear, and had a weird cackle to it like electricity. My ears rang after it spoke, all other noise gone except for a slight tinny ringing. "He wants you," it whispered through the ringing in my head. Its voice was slow, somewhat male, and perhaps even seductive if I couldn't see the thing it came from. I even felt its breath in my ear, but I was still looking at it through the gate, not even within arm's reach. Its eyes narrowed, and I saw a mouth slowly open, a gaping hole with 2 rows of yellow pointed teeth in the darkness. Each tooth looked about as long as my little finger, but pointed like a dagger, made for ripping flesh from bone. I whimpered softly. It smiled at me, teeth parted slightly in a mutant grin, but mouth unmoving as it spoke and whispered again. "He wants you to come." And then I felt true fear. I felt my hands clenching my stupid little llama lunch bag so hard my nails bit into my skin around the rough cord, shaking like a seizure. Cold sweat dripping down my back and my eyes so wide it hurt. I was cold with dread, and as a pink pointed tongue slipped out from jagged teeth, I slowly lowered my eyes inch by agonizing inch to the ground and turned to face the rest of the platform. I turned slowly, still trying to watch him out of the corner of my eye. But he remained still. Hand reached out, glowing eyes and gleaming smile. He remained that way as I slowly walked past the gate and down the first turning I came across. I crossed the platform for the next tube and got on it. I didn't even care where it was going, or even what line it was. I could still hear a ringing in my ears, drowning everything else out like muted radios. As I stepped onto the tube, one trembling foot still on the platform, I heard it whisper in my ear, "Next time, then." I didn't turn around. I stepped on the tube and stood with my back to the platform until the doors closed behind me. And I stood that way, spine rigged and shoulders high, head bent and back to the door I had got on, until I got to the end of the Metropolitan line, half an hour later. That was 2 years ago now. I never got off at Baker Street since. I even closed my eyes and put my hands over my ears on the rare occasions I have to go past it. I even moved flat so I didn't have to use the Bakerloo line anymore. But I've never seen or heard that thing ever since. I have no idea who this he was that wanted me, and I hope I never find out. I just know that I'm not crazy. I didn't imagine it, and it really did happen. I've never told anyone because they'd think I was crazy. But I know. I know what I saw, and I don't think I'll ever forget. Sometimes, at other stations, between the Great Gates and the other tunnels, I sometimes think I catch a flash of bony white hands or glowing yellow eyes. I'll walk fast with my head down and pray to a God I don't believe in that this won't be the next time it had mentioned. Thank you for watching and/or listening to this video. If you enjoyed my narration, please hit the like button, and if you don't already, go ahead and subscribe to my channel. Let me know what you thought of these stories in the comments section below, and check out the links to the original posts in the video description. If you have a story you would like me to narrate on this channel, please email me at mrsinisterstories@gmail.com. I do really appreciate all the continued support from everybody subscribing to my channel, watching my videos, commenting on them, liking them, etc. If you want to go a step further and help me to grow, please consider purchasing a t-shirt or hoodie from my Teespring store, donating via my PayPal, or you can just share this video in anyone in the horror community or anyone you know that may like my content. Thanks again for watching.